Hi, I'm David, and today I'd like to give you something to think about. My study today comes from John, the 4th chapter. When the 4th chapter of John opens up, we find that Jesus and his disciples are baptizing in Judea, around the same area in which John the Baptist was baptizing. Interesting thing, though, was Jesus was making more disciples at that time than John the Baptist. No, this is a good thing, right? Absolutely. After all, John the Baptist himself said of his relationship with Jesus that I must decrease that he might increase. And so, yes, this was a good thing, but nonetheless, we find that the Lord decides that he needs to leave and go back to Galilee. In order to get to Galilee from Judea, he had to cross into Samaria. Well, he really didn't have to cross into Samaria. In fact, many of the Jewish leaders would bypass Samaria totally to get to Galilee. They would follow the Jordan River northward until they got over top of Samaria, and then they would travel in their Gentile land, and then they'd cross back over into Galilee. This was because there was a lot of hatred and a lot of strife between the pure-blooded Jews and the mixed-race Jews that were in Samaria. You see, back whenever Israel had become two separate countries, two separate kingdoms, back in the divided kingdom era, we find that the nation of Israel, which consisted of Galilee and Samaria, was conquered by Assyria. And the Assyrians, what they did once they conquered the Israels, what they did was they deported all of the best and the brightest people they had. The ruling class, the nobility, all that, the teachers, the artisans, and they replaced them with people of foreign lineage that they had captured when they took their nations. And so as a result, after a few generations, you had a lot of intermarriage and a lot of interbreeding, and the pure bloodline of Abraham was pretty much lost among the Samaritan people. Now, Jesus takes a direct path into Samaria, and he stops at a place called Sychar. And this is where we begin our study today in John chapter 4. Jesus comes to this well here, and it's noontime, the middle of the day, and he is tired. The disciples, they go into town to buy some food. Jesus sits beside this well, and sure enough, a Samaritan lady comes along. Now, this is kind of unusual when you think about it, because drawing water and carrying it back to your house was a very tedious job. It was a type of job that you didn't want to do in the middle of the day when the sun was high and the day was at its hottest. Instead, you would prefer to do this in the morning time and then again of the evening time when it was cooler. But this woman, for whatever reason, comes out in the middle of the day. And well, the reason for that is going to become clearer as we go into this lesson. Well, Jesus asked her for a drink. Well, the Samaritan lady, she instantly recognizes that this is a true Jew. She can tell by the color of his skin and his features that he is still of the true bloodline of Abraham. And she kind of chides him, chastises him, saying, how can you, who are a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink of water? Do you not know that the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans? Jesus, at this point, offers her living water, water that she drinks and she'll never thirst again. Well, she's pretty interested in this. And so Jesus tells her, go back and get your husband and bring him back, and I'll tell you more. Well, this is a problem, or at least in her eyes it's a problem, because it turns out that she's been married 5 times, and she's currently living with a man that she's not married to. Now, some people take, I think, undue liberties at suggesting that this woman had been divorced 5 times. We're not told in the scripture. She could have had a couple or even 3 or 4 husbands that died on her. We just don't know. But for whatever reason, she had really struggled with marriage, okay? And now she had pretty much given up on it, and she was living with a man. So she answers Jesus saying this, I have no husband. And Jesus says, yes, you're right. You're right in what you're saying, because the truth is you've had 5 husbands, and the man that you currently live with is not your husband at all. This is quite a revelation to her because she doesn't know Jesus at all. How does he know this? Okay. And so she says, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." And then she poses a question. Our fathers, they worshiped up here on the mountain. The Samaritans had a temple at one time up on Mount Gerizim, which overlooked this well at Sychar. But you Jews say that the place to worship is Jerusalem. Jesus answers and says this, "Woman, I tell you, the hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers of God the Father will not worship on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, but the true worshipers of God will worship him in spirit and in truth, for such the Father seeks to worship him." Jesus' point was this: worship and serving God, for that matter, is not dependent on your environment, not on your locality, not on your location. You know, in our culture today, we have a lot of church buildings that are pretty ornate, stained glass, steeples, cathedrals in some cases, very nice looking buildings. But that's not really what it takes to worship God truly. What it takes is heartfelt or worship in the Spirit. In fact, the word spirit here is actually not capitalized, and it denotes the human spirit. You give it your all when you worship God. Plus, you have to worship him in truth. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that you need to worship the true God, the one true God, the God of the Bible, the God who's called Yahweh in the Old Testament, the God who's referred to as Jehovah in the English translations, the God, the Father of Jesus Christ. There are a lot of lessons that we could get into with the woman at the well. But I'm going to leave you with this one, and that's this. How much of a priority do you put on worship? Do you have to be in a building, a certain building that has a sign on it in order to have true worship? Or can you worship where you're at right now? The answer is the latter. Worship is a state of mind. Never forget that, because that's what God expects from those that worship him. Today, if you would, look for an opportunity to worship God and do it in spirit and in truth. I'm David, and I hope I've given you something to think about.